The air was thin, cold, and silent. A silence that felt heavier than any battle roar. It was the dead of winter in 1475, and I was one of tens of thousands, a seasoned veteran of the Ottoman army, marching through the snowbound lands of Moldavia. We were not just soldiers. We were the elite of Sultan Mehmed's forces, proud and hardened by the triumphs that had forged an empire. The siege of Constantinople, the campaigns that had crushed the kingdoms of Serbia, Bosnia, and Wallachia. What could these scattered forest dwellers possibly do to stop us? A grand army that had toppled walls and humbled kings. Yet, as we advanced, every step took us deeper into a chilling, unknown territory. The land itself seemed to be our enemy. Villages were not just empty. They were burned to ash, their memory erased. Wells were poisoned. Roads vanished beneath a thick, impenetrable fog. Then, through the heavy air, a sound cut through the stillness. The horns. At first, we thought it was just another small ambush, a nuisance we had grown accustomed to. But this was no minor raid. Arrows materialized from all sides, a storm of death we could not see. Horses panicked, their panicked cries echoing through the trees as screams from our men filled the air. We couldn't see 5 steps in front of us. The ground became a treacherous quagmire, soaked not by rain, but by blood and mud. Stephen of Moldavia, as we soon discovered, wasn't simply defending his land. He was a hunter. He was herding us, like terrified animals, into the swamp, a place where thousands of us were cut down without ever seeing our foe. The cold did not kill us. The raw, unyielding fear did. And I was one of the few, the lucky few, who would escape Vaslui and live to tell this harrowing tale. With this extraordinary account, we begin our exploration into one of the most profound military defeats the Ottoman Empire would ever face. The Battle of Vaslui and Sultan Mehmed II's audacious war with Moldavia. In the wake of his crushing victory over Uzun Hasan at Otlukbeli, Sultan Mehmed II had seemingly secured his eastern frontiers against the formidable Turkic powers of the Karamanids and the Ak Koyunlu. His grand army, a force of unrivaled might, began its long and triumphant march back to the imperial capital, a symbol of the Sultan's absolute dominion. However, the shadow of personal tragedy soon fell upon his military triumphs. The following year, his beloved son, Shehzade Mustafa, a promising prince who had been carefully groomed as a potential heir, fell gravely ill and died, sending a shockwave through the government and the Ottoman court. A father's grief became a ruler's rage. Outraged and seeking a scapegoat for this sudden loss, the Sultan turned his fury on his loyal Grand Vizier, Mahmud Pasha. The Vizier was first stripped of his titles and detained before he was ultimately executed. A brutal move that not only highlighted Mehmed's increasing authoritarianism, but also his willingness to sacrifice even his most trusted allies. This swift and merciless downfall may have been orchestrated in part by Mahmud's rival, Gedik Ahmed Pasha, who was soon hailed as the new Grand Vizier in 1474. The man who had dutifully and loyally served Mehmed for over 2 decades in countless military expeditions across the Balkans and Anatolia, Mahmud Pasha was laid to rest in Constantinople. Far to the west, another chapter was closing. Following the death of the legendary Albanian lord Skanderbeg in 1468, the unified Albanian resistance against the Ottomans had lost its central leader and its driving force. For 25 years, Skanderbeg had masterfully unified the nobles of his homeland and, through a combination of brilliant military tactics and strategic alliances with Western European powers, had kept the Turks at bay. But with his death, the Albanian nobility was left leaderless and fractured. Skanderbeg's young and inexperienced son, John II Castrioti, was too young to assume command, and none of the other surviving noble families could command the same respect or allegiance from the broader population. Nevertheless, a spirit of local resistance persisted, quietly supported by the Venetians from their coastal strongholds in Shkodra, Durrës, and Lazio. While Sultan Mehmed spent much of 1474 secluded in his imperial palace, grappling with a recurring bout of gout, he dispatched a powerful army to the west to quell this ongoing Albanian defiance. Recalling the failure to capture Durrës in 1467, the Sultan now tasked Hadim Suleiman Pasha with laying siege to Shkodra, a critical move designed to sever the flow of aid to the Albanian resistance from the north. Leading a provincial army of over 20,000 men, the Rumelian Beylerbey marched across the Balkans in the spring, arriving to lay siege to the Venetian stronghold by mid-May. Though the city walls crumbled under the relentless assault of heavy Ottoman artillery fire, the local garrison, fueled by a ferocious will to survive, managed to hold out for several months. In one final, desperate assault, in August alone, the Turkish forces suffered a staggering 3,000 casualties. As his losses mounted and the unsettling news of a Christian fleet approaching to relieve the siege reached him, the Ottoman Pasha had no choice but to withdraw his army from Shkodra. The Venetians celebrated this great, unexpected reprieve. But instead of returning to the imperial capital, Suleiman received new orders from Mehmed II. A new, more pressing threat had emerged in the distant lands of Moldavia, and he was to muster a fresh army and march toward the Danube. To understand this new threat, one must look back at the history of Moldavia. Much like its sister state, Wallachia, the Principality of Moldavia was founded in the mid-14th century, emerging from the turbulent decline of Mongol power and the weakening of the Kingdom of Hungary's eastern frontier. Around 1345, Dragos of Maramuresh, a Vlach noble, was sent by the Hungarian crown to establish a strategic border march against the relentless Tatar incursions. He succeeded, creating a realm that marked the birth of Moldavia as a political entity. Shortly after Dragos's death, his successors were expelled by a rival voivode, Bogdan I, who in 1359 had rebelled against Hungarian authority to assert Moldavian independence. Under his leadership, and that of his successors, Moldavia grew into a robust principality with its own institutions, a standing army, and a royal dynasty. Its territory, stretching between the Carpathian Mountains and the Dniester River, encompassed crucial trade routes to the Black Sea. By the late 14th century, however, the principality found itself precariously wedged between the ambitions of Hungary, Poland, and the rising Ottomans, all of whom coveted its vital Black Sea ports of Ackerman and Kilia. For the 15th century, Moldavia, like Wallachia, served as a crucial and often volatile buffer state for all three powers. The year 1451 saw a significant turning point when Bogdan II was murdered and usurped by his brother, Peter III. Seeking security, Peter became an official vassal of Poland, while also paying a yearly tribute to the Ottomans. Yet Bogdan's son, Stephen, a man of fierce resolve and cunning, received support from the Hungarian armies of John Hunyadi, and, along with his cousin Vlad III Dracula, reclaimed his throne in 1457. The new ruler, now Stephen III, continued to pay tribute to the Ottomans, using the peace to enact sweeping reforms. He expanded and professionalized his army, creating a standing force of mercenaries and improving the mobilization of peasant levies. He also moved to curtail the power of the Vlach nobility, enacting new judicial laws and tax codes to promote central control from his capital of Suceava. In a move that revealed his opportunistic genius, Stephen III supported the Ottoman armies in their war against Wallachia in 1462, a gambit that allowed him to recapture Kilia by 1465 and seize control of the strategic Danube Delta. King Matthias Corvinus of Hungary observing that Moldavia was once again re-establishing itself as a regional player under its ambitious new ruler, invaded the country in 1467. He was met with a devastating defeat at the Battle of Baia, where he lost up to 10,000 men and was even injured himself. The victorious Stephen followed up on his triumph by raiding Transylvania and thwarting a Golden Horde invasion over the next 4 years. During this period, his former rival, Peter III, attempted to seize the Moldavian throne with the forces of Radu III of Wallachia, but his efforts were ultimately unsuccessful. By the early 1470s, the fragile relationship between Mehmed II and Stephen had begun to deteriorate, as the Sultan insisted that Kilia be returned to Wallachian control. With Ottoman armies preoccupied in Anatolia against Uzun Hasan, Stephen III saw his opportunity. He terminated his tributary status with the Sublime Porte and invaded Wallachia in the fall of 1473. The strongly pro-Ottoman Radu III was defeated in battle and replaced by his Danesht relative, Basarab III. The political scene was now in turmoil. By the end of the year, Radu reclaimed his throne with the support of Mihaloglu Ali Bey and 17,000 Akinci raiders who plundered the local countryside. Yet, the reign of the Impaler's brother was not destined to last. By the spring of 1474, Basarab regained power with Moldavian assistance. With his loyal vassal Radu III once again deposed, Mehmed sent a final, powerful ultimatum to Stephen. The Moldavian king was to either pay his annual tribute, pay homage to the Sultan in Constantinople, and immediately cede Kilia to the empire, or face the full wrath of the Ottoman armies. By the summer of 1474, the Sultan received his answer from the Moldavian voivode, a staggering and total refusal of all conditions. With this defiance, official war was declared, and orders were sent to Hadim Suleiman Pasha to march on Moldavia. The Rumelian Beylerbey, Hadim Suleiman Pasha, spent the remainder of the year gathering reinforcements for his war-weary army in Sofia. Despite the campaigning season being long over, Suleiman managed to assemble a force of between 30,000 and 40,000 troops for the Moldavian campaign. This provincial army consisted of a diverse array of forces, including Azabs, Janissaries, Akunchis, Timarli Sipahi heavy cavalry, and a contingent of Bulgarian engineers tasked with clearing a path through the difficult terrain. As Turkish troops gathered so close to his borders, Basarab III once again reverted his realm to the status of an Ottoman vassal and pledged a contingent of Wallachian cavalry for Suleiman's war effort. This crucial move opened the pathway into Moldavia for the Ottomans. Meanwhile, Stephen was able to gather around 20,000 troops for the upcoming war. Half of his army was made up of peasant conscripts mobilized from the countryside, while the other half was the regular Moldavian army, which included professional infantry, light and heavy boyar cavalry, and 20 cannons. The remaining half of the army was composed of foreign auxiliaries and mercenaries from neighboring Christian kingdoms, including 5,000 Sakali infantry, 2,000 Polish cavalry, 1,800 Hungarian infantry and handgunners, and 1,000 Wallachian volunteers. By November 1474, Suleiman began the difficult task of crossing the frozen Danube in 2 columns from Vidin and Nicopolis. The weather had already turned for the worse, and the brutal cold slowed the Ottoman host's march north. Recognizing that his men were exhausted and freezing, Suleiman rested his troops for over 2 weeks near Bucharest, where he received reinforcements from Basarab's promised contingent of 10,000 Wallachians. By December, the massive Turkish force entered Moldavia, but Stephen was ready. He employed his famous scorched-earth tactics. Hundreds of villages were burned to the ground, their wells poisoned, and their local inhabitants relocated, a strategy designed to create critical supply issues for the far more numerous Ottoman army. This was a war of attrition, and Stephen, a master of battling superior opponents, continually harassed the Ottomans with hit-and-run tactics, a strategy eerily reminiscent of those employed by his cousin, Vlad the Impaler. After nearly a month of marching through the abandoned countryside in freezing conditions, Turkish scouts sighted a few dozen intact villages in a valley where the Barlad River flows, south of the town of Vaslui, on January 10, 1475. With heavy fog, rain, and frigid temperatures plaguing his men, Suleiman made a fateful decision to rest his army in the supply-rich region before continuing his march toward the Moldavian capital. But as the Ottoman troops began to cross the river over the only bridge in the area, the chilling sound of Moldavian battle drums echoed from the north. Convinced that Stephen's entire army was just ahead, Suleiman hastily advanced his troops through the dense fog, ordering the army to assemble on the western side of the river. As the drum roll continued, more Ottoman soldiers crossed the river, moving through the marshes to the north and forming a makeshift battle formation. This move, however, brought the exhausted and now panicked Turkish host into a narrow valley, from which a deadly shower of arrows rained upon them. At the end of the marshland, the Moldavian army waited, fortified behind earthworks and trenches. As the Ottoman front lines finally came into contact with Stephen's regular army and his troops from Poland, Hungary, and Transylvania, a bloody hand-to-hand melee erupted over the highly fortified positions on the marshland. Hearing the distant roar of the struggle, Suleiman Pasha, stationed at the rear and unable to properly assess the chaotic situation on the front lines, ordered a general advance, rushing men across the small wooden bridge. Unbeknownst to him, he had just led his army directly into a meticulously planned trap. As reinforcements crossed the river, Moldavian cannon fire and barrages from handgunners began to bombard the Turkish host from the opposite side of the river. Now fully panicked, Suleiman began rushing his heavy cavalry across the wooden bridge. And this, combined with the relentless cannon fire, ultimately caused the unstable bridge to collapse. While Turkish reinforcements now desperately attempted to cross the freezing cold river, the Wallachian contingent refused to do so, a decision that led to significant tensions and arguments within the Ottoman army right in the middle of the battle. A fierce war of words caused Basarab to withdraw his support for Suleiman, initiating his withdrawal from the battle entirely. Meanwhile, on the front lines, the Ottoman Sipahis managed to push back the left wing of the Zekeli and Moldavian professionals. But this success only lured the army deeper into Stephen's trap. Suddenly, the Moldavian war drums sounded once again, this time from the forest to the left of the Ottoman line. With their flank completely exposed, Ottoman officers panicked. Never having been made fully aware of the tactical situation, Suleiman desperately tried to form a secondary line to defend against this new threat. But the main Moldavian attack was planned against the Ottoman right flank and the heavy Boyar cavalry of Stephen, which had been hidden behind a forested hill until that moment charged with full force into the rear and flank of the Ottoman host. Despite still outnumbering their opponents, the exhausted Turkish soldiers believed they were surrounded on three sides and began routing en masse. The battle had now devolved into a massacre. Individual Ottoman units fled the battlefield in all directions. During the three-day Great Retreat, the remains of Suleiman's host were run down by Moldavian cavalry, and many Ottoman officers were taken captive and then executed. The Battle of Vaslui would become one of the most significant and humiliating defeats in Ottoman history. The Sublime Porte suffered up to 20,000 casualties during the battle, a devastating loss compared to Stephen's mere 5,000. Like Skanderbeg before him, the Moldavian ruler was anointed by the Pope with the prestigious title of Athleta Christi for his great victory over the Turks. But such a victory could only be celebrated briefly, for Stephen knew that Mehmed's wrath would soon be at his gates. In the months that followed, he concluded a vital alliance with Hungary, preparing for the inevitable revenge. Since the Ottoman conquest of Serbia and Bosnia, the Turkish marcher lords of the Balkans had gradually intensified their raids deep into the heart of Europe. In 1474, Mihalolu Ali Bey launched a significant raid into Hungary, reaching as far as Oradea, leaving a trail of enslavement and looting in his wake. Later that year, Turkish raiders from Bosnia invaded Croatia, extending their reach to Varaždin, Metlika, and Ptuj. By the time of the disaster at Vaslui, Ottoman raiders had penetrated into the border regions of Carniola and Carinthia, creating widespread panic in the royal courts of both Hungary and Austria. These devastating incursions prompted King Matthias Corvinus of Hungary to finally pledge his full support for Stephen's war effort against Mehmed. Pausing his campaign in Bohemia, the Hungarian king gathered a powerful army of 10,000 and marched on the recently constructed Ottoman fortress of Shabak in the fall of 1475. By the start of the new year, the fortress was besieged with the assistance of the titular despot of Serbia, Vuk Grigorevich, the grandson of Durad Branković. After 30 days of brutal fighting, Shabak fell to the invaders, a critical victory that further secured the hinterland surrounding Belgrade from future Ottoman incursions across the Danube. In the weeks following the siege, Hungarian raids into Turkish-controlled Bosnia and Serbia began. Among the raiders was none other than a newly released Vlad Dracula. As he had done over a decade before, the former Wallachian voivode impaled and massacred soldiers and civilians alike during yet another campaign of terror. In retaliation for the fall of Shabak, the Ottoman marcher lords of Serbia resumed their destructive raids into Hungary throughout the summer of 1476, overrunning the Banat of Temesvar. However, this force was defeated at the town of Bela Crkva during their journey back to friendly territory. Further raids into Croatia and Slovenia were also initiated, resulting in the sacking of towns such as Gurk, Vipava, Postojna, and Ljubljana. By the end of the year, Ottoman raids had extended as far as Tarvisio, Arnoldstein, and Villach, as peasant revolts erupted in the broader region. The situation had become so dire that King Matthias's bride, Princess Beatrice of Naples, had to navigate her way into her future husband's plundered kingdom through charred villages and fields of corpses, all while desperately trying to avoid the Turkish raiders. By the spring of 1476, Sultan Mehmed had finally recovered from his bout of gout and began to plan his personal march on Moldavia, a mission of vengeance to restore the honor of his armies after the humiliating defeat at Vaslui. Like Germanicus, avenging the fallen Roman legions at the Teutoburg forest, the Ottoman Sultan gathered a formidable force of 40,000 in Sofia. He marched along the Black Sea coast and reached the Danube in early summer. While it took the army over 3 days to cross the Great River, Mehmed's Tatar allies from Crimea also invaded Moldavia from the east. However, they were swiftly routed near Ackerman by Stephen's forces and pushed out of the country entirely, thwarting Mehmed's plan to open a crucial second front in the war. Like a year and a half earlier, the Moldavian voivode intended to employ scorched-earth tactics and attrition warfare against a numerically superior foe. However, Mehmed was far more cautious than his pasha had been. He did not repeat the mistakes of the previous expedition and marched carefully through the region, meticulously ensuring the safety of his supply lines. As the Ottoman army advanced toward Suceava through the White Valley, also known as Valea Alba, they finally encountered Stephen's smaller host of 12,000. The Turkish vanguard, led by none other than Hadim Suleiman Pasha himself, was ambushed by the Moldavian ruler and suffered heavy losses. It was only with the arrival of the main Ottoman army that the Rumelian Beylerbey's contingent was saved, forcing Stephen to retreat to his camp. Due to the fact that he had not been reinforced with troops from Poland and Hungary, as he had been the previous year, the voivode decided to go on the defensive and allow the invaders to attack his fortified line, which was located behind a forest. The next day, Mehmed ordered a general advance of his army. But this resulted in a great blunder. The forest through which the army passed was set ablaze by the Moldavians, resulting in many casualties to the Ottoman host. During this panic, the army was also showered with incoming fire from Moldavian handgunners and artillery from ahead. It was only when the Sultan himself arrived on the front lines and rallied his officers and janissaries that morale in the Ottoman army finally surged. Now, overwhelmed by his opponent's numbers, Stephen withdrew his host from the battlefield in order to prepare for the siege of his capital. Although Mehmed had secured a victory at the Battle of Vaslui Alba, it had come at a heavy cost. Between 5,000 and 10,000 Ottomans had been killed or wounded, compared to only around 1,000 Moldavians. Due to these crippling losses and a plague now roaming the local countryside, the Sultan was unable to follow up on his victory over Stephen, who had fled to the Polish border to reassemble his strength. Unable to seize the primary fortresses of the region, such as Kilia, Ackerman, and Turgu Neams, Mehmed concluded his campaign by the end of the summer, but not before ravaging the entirety of Moldavia. Although left in ruins, Stephen's realm managed to survive Mehmed's onslaught and maintain its independence. With Ottoman armies gone from the local region, King Matthias of Hungary ordered his vassal, Stephen Bathory of Transylvania, to invade Wallachia alongside the Moldavians to restore Vlad Dracula to his throne. By the fall of 1476, Basarab III had lost his throne once again. However, in a demonstration of the extreme volatility of Wallachian politics, he managed to regain power by the start of 1477 with Ottoman support. During this struggle, Vlad was cornered at the town of Snagov and was beheaded by Turkish agents. The head of the Impaler Prince was sent to Mehmed, where it was placed upon a high stake for all to see in the imperial capital. 15 years after his initial campaign of terror in the Balkans, Vlad III Dracula had finally been defeated and killed, representing a significant propaganda victory for Sultan Mehmed II. With Wallachia secured and Moldavia on the back foot, Mehmed could now turn his gaze to his wars elsewhere in the Balkans. That concludes our deep dive into this pivotal moment in Ottoman history. We hope that by animating these complex events, we can make the past feel more immediate and engaging. Our research is always based on the work of respected historians, with references provided on screen for those who wish to explore further. We hope you found this video both entertaining and informative. If you did, please consider liking, sharing, and leaving a comment below. It helps immensely. Don't forget to subscribe and press the bell icon so you're notified the moment our next video is uploaded. Stay tuned, because the next video in our series is coming soon.